Would you introduce yourself, first of all, and tell us where you were and the years?
Okay, I'm Nancy Laughrey. I grew up outside Boston, Massachusetts. I went to teacher training school in Western Mass, and my brother was in the Peace Corps in Fiji, and I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I applied. My father called me. He said, Nancy, you're going to South America. And I said, what country? He said, Sierra Leone. I said, Dad, that's not South America.
You knew that much.
That's West Africa. So I graduated and went into the Peace Corps in Sierra Leone in 1968, about a week or two after graduating from the Teachers College. And I went over with about 120 people. That we were the first group of Peace Corps that trained in country, which was 1968. That was kind of our claim to fame. We flew into a very troubled country. They were not.
Before we get into the country like that, still I'm a little bit interested, especially in talking about your brother who was in the Peace Corps.
Right.
How much older was he? Where was he?
He's 4 years older, and he trained in Hawaii, where he lives now.
So did I.
And he decided to go. He got his master's in art in the Art Institute and met a girl who was from Canada. They got married. They went in together, and they trained in Maui. And so he literally re-upped, and they were there 5 years. But hearing the story that he was going to go in just kind of hit my imagination, and I thought I didn't want to just go out and teach like a normal graduate. I wanted to do something exciting. So that's why I applied to the Peace Corps. And little did I know.
But would you call him a major influence on your decision to apply to Peace Corps?
Not major, no. But the fact that he was experiencing this, and he was 4 years older, so he had started his life in Fiji. I did not communicate with him very much over 4 years, 5 years rather, and neither did he, because it was just too difficult. I don't think I even knew his address in Fiji to communicate with him.
Uh-huh.
So once I went to West Africa, when I came back, I was in Amherst, Massachusetts. I started graduate school and met my husband, and then eventually moved to Tulsa. So.
All right. So when he got back, didn't you talk to him quite a bit about what it was like? Especially?
Well, he moved to Vancouver and realized that with his wife's family was there after he got back. But he got back, if I was in 68, and he started the year, because he'd gone to graduate school, he started after, even though I knew he was going in. He went for training, came back and got married. It's kind of a long story. But he went to Vancouver after the Peace Corps.
British Columbia or Washington?
British Columbia, yeah. So then he decided that climate was not his after living in Fiji, so he said, I'd like to go back to the islands. So they got jobs in Hawaii and moved on. So
okay.
Anyway.
So you didn't do a lot of talking with him about
it.
In fact, it sounds like very little.
No, very little.
Did you have any other influences that?
You know, when I think back, I was the only person in my class at the Teachers College that went into the Peace Corps, the absolute only. So I don't know, I never talked to people who had been in. It was just something that appealed to my imagination, and I said, I'm going to do this, and I did.
Mm-hmm. Did you talk to your classmates about, I think I'm going to join the Peace Corps? What do you think of that?
Absolutely not.
You didn't? Why not?
Because it was kind of late in the game. The FBI came to my college.
Yeah.
I was living illegally in an apartment in downtown. We were supposed to be 4 years in a dorm, and my roommate and I said, we're not doing this. So we lied and said we were living with family, which was totally bogus. And so the FBI came and absolutely talked to the president of my college and said, Miss Hayes is applying to the Peace Corps. We want to know if she's got, what her background is, if there's been any situations or problems with her being here. And I guess they were just investigating my background. And he said, well, she's not, where is she living? She's living downtown? And he said, yes, her address is this apartment. So it was news to even the president of my state college that I was going in. There were so few people. They were planning on going out and being teachers, and that just, it didn't interest me, and so we never talked about it. They really had no interest in it, even if I did bring it up, and I don't think I did, because it was the spring of my senior year, so it wouldn't have come up that much.
Okay, so when you applied, I think the application at that time, at least the one I filled out, said, gave you 5 choices about where you might go, 5 countries. Did you have that?
I have no memory of that,
Okay.
But there are a lot of things I have no memory about. But many things I do.
Yeah.
And I've just kind of collected things here that might interest you. Can I go back into what happened in the country? Can I tell you about that yet?
Not quite.
Okay.
No, I want to move up to that. We haven't even done training yet.
It was in country. We were told we were going to West Africa.
How many of you?
There were 110, 120 maybe.
From all over?
From all over the country. In fact, I've got the list of people who went.
I don't need anything like that.
No, but I have the list of people. In fact, I just recently, about 7 years ago, had a reunion with the people that were in my eastern province.
Wow.
We went to Beaufort, South Carolina, because there's a connection between Sierra Leoneans and the Gullah Geechees in South Carolina.
Uh-huh.
So many slaves who were in the outer islands in South Carolina and Georgia went back to Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone. Mm-hmm. So that's why it was called Freetown when they went back. So when we planned this reunion, we thought we would, study something that would be applicable to what our experiences had been.
Yeah. Okay. How long was your training?
It was 2 months. We had language and agricultural. So, like I said, it was the first. It was interesting because it was in country, and not only there are two or three major languages there, Mende and Timni, and we were taught, because we were going to the Eastern Province, which was primarily Mende speakers. Mm-hmm. We were taught Mende kind of ongoing. We'd do agriculture maybe in the morning and then do language in the afternoon.
Okay.
And so that went on. We also went to the Eastern Province and were in schools, kind of like student teachers. Uh-huh. Many of the people I went into the Peace Corps with were liberal arts majors, and they had I had been trained as a teacher. They had not. Yeah. So they needed those basic tools to teach. And so they were there, and we had, in the agricultural class, we had science teachers who were also from the United States. They were American science teachers who taught us how we would, they were giving us different ways to teach, especially to the kids who had no idea what had any teacher training classes.
Okay.
So anyway, it was 2 months worth, and then we were put in a village. Some people were put in villages far out. I think they based it on how well you did in the language. I was not terrific. So
You said you were not terrific?
I was not, because I'm a visual learner, and it was all auditory.
Yeah.
So the teacher, who was Mendy, would say "buam bisie babigaon," and I'd go, okay. If he had written it down as he was saying it, I could see it. I would have been much better. But there were kids there who just picked it up like that, and they ended up being in villages that could have taken a lorry and a boat to get to, very remote villages, as opposed to where I ended up, which was an English-speaking college attached to a primary school. The college was a teacher training college, so the people in the college would come down to our primary school, and we would watch them student teach. If that does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I was the only woman in the primary school, kindergarten through 6th grade, the only woman. And
Why is that?
because I was my roommate was from Canada. She was a what is it? It's Viso or something, CUSO. She was Canadian volunteer, and she was my roommate. We had a house there. And she taught science at the college. She never was in the primary school. So basically, the men, I would say 95, if not more, % of the teachers in Sierra Leone at that point were men. So me being the only one at the primary school female was not unusual at all.
Was it frowned upon
It was
by the society, by the culture?
not that well. It was the women had their place. I had a teacher friend who, and I had to eat, so his wife would make us meals, and he would bring me lunch that she had made.
Yeah.
And then they worked in the field. The women were very much in the agricultural part, in the fields. The men, because they were getting actual salaries, which was nominal. I'm assuming I never talked to them about it. But the men were needing a job, and that was something that they could train for at this college, which was a Presbyterian college. So it was most of the professors were from England, but everybody spoke English because of Sierra Leone being a protectorate that was gained its independence in 1961.
Let me ask you this about your training. In country, was there a deselection process?
Absolutely. We had a psychologist, clinical psychologist. I don't think he had a doctorate. And he was there, and he would interview us and feel us out as far as I'm very gregarious. There was a girl there was very quiet, unassuming, kind of, floated into the woodwork. She was told that it wasn't a good fit for her, and she went home. And I'm not sure how many people fit into that, where they just, after interviewing the psychologist interviewing us, he would say, this person isn't going to last, because they just don't.
So one person is making this decision about.
But they deselected themselves. When they went and said, "Whoa, this is not what I signed up for."
Right.
And the people who I ended up with in the Eastern Province all felt that they were where they needed to be, but the people who did, and I have no idea necessarily, because there was a primary, when we trained as teachers, there was a primary group, meaning primary school, and there was secondary. So there was two distinct groups of people who trained separately. They were trained as secondary school teachers, and we were primary. So after that decision had been made, who was going to be a primary teacher, we never had anything to do with the secondary teachers. In fact, there was nobody in my village who was a secondary teacher. And primarily, there was one other Peace Corps person who was the year before me, and he taught at the college, and he had a house probably not even a quarter mile from my house.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Well, it sounds like you were a convivial group. Would
right.
that be right?
Right, yes.
You made good friends among the other trainees?
I just got an email from a friend yesterday saying we're coming, she and he are coming into town next Friday.
Oh,
and
great.
they were at our wedding. They have been, he said he wanted to be a hog farmer when he came back. He had property in Missouri. He did. We kept up the relationship, our family, his family, and for all these years. And it's just, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people away from the reunion people that I knew from the Peace Corps that were separate from the Eastern Province people that I had the reunion with. So
Yeah,
there's probably 15 people I've kept up with.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
So, you said there were about 120 of you when you started?
Right, from all over the country.
And how many actually went? How many completed training? Do you have any
I
idea?
have no idea, as I said, but we went to a hotel in Philadelphia for medical. They gave
Shots
us
and
glasses, shots. They told us if we got rabies, you don't want to get rabies in West Africa because
Yeah.
you'll. So we had all the shots, and it was a medical grounding for us. We were given Aralen, I think it's Aralen for malaria, which we had to take every week. And so when we left there were about 110, I can't remember, probably 110 in the plane who landed. But what I started to tell you before, this country was in a civil war. So
That time, when you were there, it was in
Yes.
the midst of a civil war?
right, and they were deciding literally when we landed. We stayed in the plane because they hadn't decided if we were going to be able to stay.
Wow.
So here we are, all ready, and we land, and there were soldiers at the airport. And the reason the Civil War was happening, as opposed to the one that happened in 1991, which was totally separate, was the Mende and the Temne, 2 tribes were vying for the presidency. So there was a constant conflict. So from the time I got there, when we would go on the road in Allure, there were checkpoints with people, with soldiers with guns. And so we were amazed, number one. And then they said, yes, you can stay, but you're going to be at this college, Florida Bay College, for a week before we really decide that you can stay. So we were all sequestered at this college for a week, not knowing what was going to happen. And then finally, after a week, they said, yes, you can continue with your training. And meanwhile, there were like I said, there were Peace Corps in the country already. But these new Peace Corps, they didn't know us. They didn't know if we were going to be able to stay. So after a week, they said yes, and that's when training started.
Did you know at the time that a powerful factor in whether or not you were going to stay or not was the dangerous situation in that country?
I don't think we realized, definitely when we got out of the plane and saw armed soldiers around, we got a feeling that this was not something that was just going to pass over, that this was something very serious within the country.
But you didn't know what it was?
But we did not, at that point, I don't think we even knew that there was a tribal problem between two. And the thing with the government, the people who were in the upper echelons of the government were driving around in Mercedes. So
Of course.
so the people who wanted into the presidency were seeing these people who had all these things, and they wanted into those positions, and that's what created the strife in the country.
So, did you have a good description of what it would be like in the town that you were eventually assigned to?
Not at all. No, we were kind of thrown into it. it was interesting, which is a side note, but when we were in Four Bay, here you've got 110 kids just hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
So they provided this African ballet to us. And then everybody go down to this auditorium and we're going to perform an African ballet. So the women on stage were all bare-breasted. And I'm talking about 110, 50 of them probably were men going, this is interesting. And that was something I thought, and it was cultural. There was nothing, many women would be bare-breasted feeding babies in public, which was unheard of for the Americans, for us.
Yeah.
But was very normal for them. And then other women were more circumspect, and they would have tops on. So it was just something that the more rural you got, the more, they were just free with that.
Yeah.
So we were there, and they finally decided that we would continue training, and we went to Njala University, which was the agricultural training part, and I can remember pulling peanuts out of the ground, and somebody who had never been in an agricultural position before, it was very interesting for us to do things that we'd never faced before.
But that wasn't going to be part of your
No, not at all. But they just wanted us to show what was going on in the country, how
I think that's
they
great.
provided. So.
Okay. So how long did you say this training was? 2 months?
2 months.
2 months, all right. And at the end of the 2 months, you felt what?
I felt more secure having been in teacher training college than I'm sure my cohorts did not.
Uh-huh.
Because at that time, graduating with a liberal arts degree with really no, it was just something that was done back then. They graduated with liberal arts degree, no specific field. So I'm sure I and the people who had been in teacher training were much more comfortable.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. I had just had a liberal arts degree.
Right.
No talent, nothing. I don't even know why they selected me.
But you learn fast because, it's do or die kind of thing.
Right. Yep.
Right.
So what was your assignment and where?
Well, I met a man who was a teacher at the primary school, and we became friends, and he realized that he kind of said, I'd like Nancy in my village. So when he spoke to the Peace Corps, because he was a trainer in the Eastern Province. He was a teacher training all of us in the Eastern Province.
But he's not Peace Corps.
No, he was Sierra Leonean.
Okay.
And he knew I played guitar, and he said, and I was outgoing, and he was a very funny, outgoing, gregarious man. And he kind of chose me, and he went to the Peace Corps and said, I'd like her to be with us.
Neat.
So that was something too. And
did you think at the time that his motives for wanting you were right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It was very.
He
We just hit it off. We were kind of the same personalities, and he knew that I'd be comfortable in pretty much any situation.
Great.
Yeah. In fact, at one point I had a Girl Scout troop, and I can remember we walked into the bush, and in West Africa it's called the bush, and we walked into the bush probably a couple of miles, and I had a Girl Scout troop, and we were greeted by this village, and I can remember being in a room with about 16 girls, and we were all on the floor because they had no place for us to stay. And we were honorary guests because they killed chickens, which is something in Sierra Leone. If you have chickens, primarily rice and fish is what you get. Mm-hmm. In fact, this man that I was talking about, his wife would cook for us, and we'd eat that, and it was called bunga fish, and it was dried fish, and they added it with palm oil to rice. So, interestingly, I went in thin, and many of the Peace Corps girls went in heavy. The heavy girls lost weight, and the thin girls gained weight because of the rice. So it was an interesting situation.
Did you live with a family at all?
No, I had in Sierra Leone, it's very primitive as far as most houses are made out of brick and thatched roofs.
Mm-hmm.
But I had, because of this Presbyterian college, I had a cinder block house. And we had Ruth and I, who was the Canadian girl, shared the house. There was another cinder block house beside us, and I think she was from Britain. And I had my own bedroom, which was, our position was the cream of the crop, because other kids were far out in the bush and there was nothing like that.
Right.
So I really, was spoiled.
Did you have electricity?
We had electricity that stayed on until 10 o'clock at night. We had a refrigerator that was kerosene.
Oh my God!
So seriously,
Yeah.
we were spoiled, and I don't know if we knew it at that point how spoiled we were. And we also hired 2 local Sierra Leone boys, because every child had to pay school fees.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have the money. So they came to us and said, "We'd like to work for you, and if you pay our school fees." And we said, "That sounds good to us." And they literally would iron our clothes, wash our clothes, iron our clothes, and then they were allowed to go to school because of the money. And ironing clothes there in Sierra Leone was very important, and the iron was not electric, obviously. There was a coal iron, so
Yeah.
they had a fire in the back, and they'd fill it with coals. But in order to kill I'm trying to remember the flies, they're tombe flies, I think they're called tombe flies. If you don't iron every bit of the clothing to kill the larvae of these flies, they get onto your body, and they did. So one day I looked down and I thought, what is that worm crawling out of my skin? And the tombe fly had laid the larva and had now burrowed into my skin and was coming out. And so that was interesting. But
Yes, so.
and other people had sores on their legs from whatever reason. I never did get that. And knock on wood, I stayed healthy, because there was a lot of, when you're eating foods and things, and we had a water filter in the kitchen, so the water went through and filtered the water, so there was nothing, there was
That's
no
good.
bacteria or little critters in the water.
So were you healthy the whole 2 years?
Absolutely. I was, which
You never
was
got sick?
maybe a little stomach. Palava, which is a West African, if you have tummy, they called it runny tummy. And it was, anything was a problem, it was called palava, P-A-L-A-V-A. And that was I'm assuming it was the Mendi term. I'm not sure if it was the Timni term, but it was palava. So if you had trouble with somebody in the village, it was a palava. So anything that, interrupted the piece of your life was a palava.
Okay. Who were you going to work with in your assignment? I'm talking about post-country national.
As I said, my primary school was all male teachers, and they welcomed me as a colleague. And I also ended up teaching music at the college. They found out that I played guitar,
Good.
and so they didn't have anybody who was. And so it was pretty much, when I look back, music theory. I was teaching, a little bit of music theory, but primarily teaching them songs and playing with the song. And this is one of the instruments that is very typical in West Africa.
Wow,
and it's
something.
a gourd with the
Gourd,
shells, and very loud. So, and we had, what is it called? The wood. In the Philippines, you had to build buildings.
Oh, you mean like bamboo?
Bamboo.
Yeah.
I would take, in order to make instruments for the guys that I was teaching, because There were no women in my college training classes. No women at all.
Did you ask people about that?
It was just accepted. I was 21 and I went into a completely strange situation, so I thought they knew what they were doing, and I never even questioned that. To this day, I probably never questioned. It was just something that was done. And the trained Sierra Leonean men, if you knew that somebody had some education past primary school, they had a pinky that they let grow. It was a fingernail. A fingernail.
Oh, yeah.
So you would see that and say, oh, this man is educated. So the bamboo, we'd cut down to this and we'd get a stick. So the rhythm with the bamboo, things that I did with them, I can remember one Christmas, I took the guitar and took my kids, the younger kids, and I taught up to 5th and 6th grade, and math and English and art and music in the primary school. We went around the villages and we were singing English songs. Obviously, I did not know Mendy songs. And I can remember the villagers, we would grow as a group and they would stop us. We would sing and do our thing. And they would dash us, and dashing was they would give us money. That was that was something very small. And I can remember putting the coins in my guitar, I don't know, just to keep them for, to spend something later on the group. But dashing was very important. And when you would go through like I said, the country was in civil war. So if you came to a stop where the soldier was saying, stop, lorry full of people, stop, the way to get past him was to give him money. It was very, very common and accepted that this was the way the country ran, that they would be, given bribes, basically, to get around. And they did it, it was just an accepted process.
Was there ever a time when whoever you were with in whatever vehicle you were in, approaching the checkpoint, said, I'm not paying, this is wrong?
No.
Okay.
No, it was just accepted. I do want to tell you that I have some snake stories when I tell my grandkids, want to hear my Peace Corps snake stories? And I said, yes. I was in a lorry and I was going back to my village, as I remember. We traveled exclusively in lorries. So what you would find when a lorry is a truck, a lorry is a truck, the driver in the front, in the back, just imagine a pickup with 2 rows of seats on both sides. So you literally get up into the back of the lorry. They would have like a step. You get back up. You could be sitting there with a Pekin, and a Pekin is a child, on your lap, and a woman can be beside you holding a chicken. I mean, this is how people got around. And because of that, and it would be very nominal. The country's currency was Leone's, so it depended on how far you went, that they would tell you. And you would lorry would stop, which was, lorry is the British term for truck. The lorry would stop. People would let out, and people would come in, and they saw a white woman. It was kind of, and I even say in here, there was a lot of talk like, who is this woman? Because it was pretty rare that you would see a white woman driving around in a lorry, and you would say Peace Corps Miyange, which means I'm Peace Corps, and if they knew what that meant or not. So anyway, we were driving along one day, and this man who was literally, and we called him Pa, an older West Sierra Leone man, was in the street. He had a loincloth on. That was it. And he's jumping up and down trying to get the lorry to stop. So we were all looking out the side because there were no sides to this. When you're sitting on the benches, you can see outside, because from the bench up was empty. There were no. So we're looking out and saying, what's he doing? So the driver stopped. We all got out, and on the road was a Gabon viper, And a Gabon viper, if you've ever gone to a zoo, a lot of times they'll have a Gabon viper, which is from Gabon, G-A-B-O-N, another country.
Yeah.
Very short, very fat, very poisonous. So what he was wanting us to do, the man on the road, was to knock the snake, in order for the snake to stop crawling, to knock the snake's head with a pole that the driver had. So the driver got a metal pole out of the back. He pretty well knew what he was doing and what the man was asking. It thumped the snake's head. The native man cut. Everybody had machetes. Even cutting grass was machetes. Mm-hmm. So there was no lawnmower. Wow. There was no. Everything was. Took the machete, lopped off the snake's head, and we thought, okay. Because we had no idea about Gabon vipers or how poisonous they were. Excuse me. But then they did something that totally amazed us. They buried the head. And in retrospect, I realized that the poison would still be in the fangs. Absolutely. So if a young child came along, oh, this head looks fun to play with, they could possibly get hurt.
Yes. Or dead.
Yeah. So, and I thought later, because the Gabon viper's skin is absolutely beautiful, and I thought, gee, that would have been nice to take and, have somebody rent. I don't know what they do with snake skins, and I'm not sure what skin this is. I bought this in Sierra Leone. Can you stop in a minute? I got to shut the door.
Sure. There it goes. When did you first start feeling comfortable in your assignment, if you ever did?
Okay. Because I had been an intern student teacher in college. I mean, my college was teacher training college. So having that experience, I felt at home in a classroom. Mm-hmm. So
what was your assignment? Was your assignment strictly to just teach classes?
I was teaching. I would go to school. It was about 3/4 of a mile on a dirt road. We had the rainy season and the dry season in Sierra Leone. So everything in my house, which was a cinder block house, was moist during the rainy season. And I can remember walking to school pretty much not kind of mud, but during the dry season, of course, it would be, different. But I would walk to school, and I would, the schools were very primitive. You would walk in, and there would be 20 desks with benches, and you might have 2 or 3 people at one bench, and you had a blackboard, and that was it.
Yeah.
So when I would be teaching math, the kids would be there with books, writing down as we did the things. And so it was primarily 5th grade, so we're talking 10, 11-year-olds who would be in class. And then I can remember teaching art at one point, and things are vague because we're talking 50 years ago. But I had been taking art classes at college, and I can remember walking in, and we did wax relief. And so what it is a piece of paper, and you take a candle and you drop it on the paper. Then you take watercolor, and the wax, of course, resists. It's crayon resist. Would not. So they had watercolor, the watercolor boxes that you even see now. Sure. And I'm sure those were donated because when I say the bare bones in a classroom, I just think back and think, other than if you gave them a test, it would be in a book like this. Mm-hmm. And so,
did you have a lot of visitors in your classroom? Sierra Leone teachers?
They
who
were
wanted to see what this Yankee could do?
The college, it was a Bunabu training college. That was the name of it. So literally, most times I would have a student come down to visit, and then I would say to the student, okay, it's your turn. And the turn, because simultaneously being in my classroom as a primary teacher, in the college classes they were learning what they were now going to teach at the primary school. Mm-hmm. So they would come down. And again, I don't know what the frequency was of them coming down to teach with me, but I would I would give them a critique. I mean, they would go, and it interesting. I was reading this this book this morning that just little notes about what I made, and it said, "Well, Miss Hayes," which was my maiden name, "I'm rather upset." So I was critiquing a student who was not happy with what I was telling him. And I can remember being in a situation, it was not my school, but there was corporal punishment. And there was a teacher who was having trouble with a student. And it was, like I said, it was not at my school. I can't remember where it was. And he literally had the student back up over another student. And he took probably a branch from the tree and was beating this child. And that floor, I mean, I can visualize it to this day because it was so foreign to me as how to be a teacher. So he wrote, "I'm rather upset, Miss Hayes." And I spoke back, "Well, let's see what you do this afternoon." And I write, "It's hard to mix benevolence with honesty and firmness." So these students, and I was 21, and I was teaching students who could be in their 30s who decided to be a teacher later in life to make money for their family. And I thought, I'm teaching. So for them to look down upon me, what does she know? This young woman who, from a country we don't know about. And so
we don't know about that can't
be true. They did not know about Americans.
They did.
No.
So they didn't have any preconceived ideas about your wealth.
Right. And the people that they did know were British teachers in the college. There were no American teachers in the college except for this one Peace Corps, and he taught art. He was an art major, and he taught art at the college. But other than that, their relationships were just to Brits.
Would this also apply to the color of your skin?
Yes.
And why?
Well, I was reading this too. Did I read this? Women bathing in the river. My first thoughts centered on jumping in with them. They covered their breasts. Sometimes I don't like my color and pumwiness, which means anyone who is a foreigner. And so these people, like I said, the villagers wouldn't have that much to do with the professors in a college. Mm-hmm. So for me to be in a primary school with all men, that was unusual to begin with. But the Sierra Leone people, this is a stereotype, but they were so welcoming and so friendly that there was no contention. It was just curiosity.
They didn't assume that you were better than them because you were
absolutely
white.
not. They just greeted me. I mean, I literally could be sitting on my front porch, which wasn't a porch, but it was the front of the house, playing my guitar. And kids would come along, "Oh, there's Miss Hayes," and they'd start dancing.
Oh,
it was just,
wow.
it was just down the street. Colonialism was not just the British. There was the Indian influence. And I'm not sure if they were Pakistani, but they had a store down the street. So if you wanted to go down for a can of milk or something for food, you had to go and pay somebody. They were Lebanese, not Pakistani. So you would go to the Lebanese store. Mm-hmm. So there were people there other than, the British expatriates,
Yeah.
expats. So there was that influence too, and that was accepted, that these people would get the supplies, and you'd go into the store and there'd be everything, all the canned goods, nothing fresh, really. I don't think they sold anything fresh. They primarily canned cigarettes, juices, maybe Star beer, which is the beer of the country, which a lot of Peace Corps ended up drinking a lot of.
I imagine so.
So, no, but there was no feeling of, other than curiosity about, especially the villages who had not been around white people. They would just kind of, innocently, look at your arms or press your breasts to see if, you were like them. So, but
you understood that. You understood
absolutely,
their
and
curiosity.
I did, yes, and I did not recoil. It was just something that was accepted. And
did you ever get hit on by a man?
no, I think that was taboo. And
Taboo in what sense? Because you were American? Because that's something they never do, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know their dating habits, but there was a lot of Muslim, and you would see Muslim people, men walking with the Muslim hat and the long dress, and they would have multiple wives. And the Sierra Leonean men, I'm not sure if they had multiple wives, but it was a totally, I don't think they would even think about it, because they wouldn't know how to deal with a white woman. Okay, we know, the black culture, but this is very strange. And, so it wasn't even thought about, I don't think.
Did any of them, any of your students, ask you if you could facilitate passage to the U.S. for them?
No.
Not a single one?
Not one of them, no.
Okay.
They were, you're talking the late 60s. So, and that was the Vietnam War.
But they didn't even know about the Vietnam War, did they?
No. And civil rights was unheard of. They didn't know. I mean, it was, there was a lot of lack of worldliness on their part. And when they did art, it was always something that was in their immediate village. So the children were very isolated as far as their experiences, as were the parents. I mean, there was not a lot of education involved.
Some people in your setting would think, I like it here. I like everything that's going on. I'm just going to enjoy myself.
Right.
Or some might think, they don't know anything about segregation and integration, and they don't know anything about the Vietnam War.
Right.
I should tell them some things about.
No.
That's not you.
And interestingly enough, there were several black Peace Corps. And so we thought, they're going to go in and have a separate identity from the white kids. But because they were American cultured, they went in as if they were white. There was no differentiation, because they would have the same mindset as the white college kids that we were. So, which was interesting, because we thought maybe they had an in because of their color, but it wasn't the case at all.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Right.
But
you don't, when you were teaching, you stuck with, reading, writing, and arithmetic, basically. There was no political talk. There was none. There didn't need to be.
Well, I think I agree with that. When you're in their country.
Right.
Had they asked you, that might be different, but apparently nobody ever did.
Right.
I've talked to Peace Corps RPCVs, however, who were beleaguered with questions about what's
in the Philippines.
Yeah. Well, not just the Philippines, but I mean people that I've interviewed, like you, who were in
Ah.
various countries, and
Okay.
they really wanted to know, what's it like
Interesting.
there? Does everybody have $1 million? Does everybody drive a fancy car around?
It didn't happen. Didn't happen. And interestingly enough, I have very strong feelings about the British colonialism in Africa. Very strong feelings that
Yeah.
they came in along with the Portuguese, the Germans, the Dutch in South Africa. And the Sierra Leone is famous for diamonds. And the British Diamond Corporation came in. They had Native Americans were digging the diamonds out. And off the diamonds went to enrich the Brits. And that
Sure.
drove me crazy.
Sure.
Because that was basically stealing.
Exploitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even then, I couldn't understand it. But there's a movie called what's it called? Conflict Diamonds or something like that. And so it was just some along the same lines that the wealth of the country was being taken out and enriching other people, which is totally, to me, they could have used it, because you're talking about at my school benches in a cinder block school. There was nothing for
Right.
the people to get any enrichment from the diamonds that were.
So you could have used that to get on your high horse to tell all these struggling masses here how unfair
As
it all is.
I said, there was no political talk. There was not. You just didn't go there. And I think probably they told us, they cautioned us not to,
Who's
because
they?
we were the Peace Corps training group.
Okay.
Because there wouldn't be any point, and it would just stir up things that wasn't. You were there to teach. You were there to be there for them, and you did not bring things up like that that were happening back in the States. You just didn't.
Now I assume that you had special friends there.
Yes. There was a man who was a teacher at the practicing school, and he died. How did this happen? He was probably 30 maximum age. How
He
did
was your
this-
friend,
Yes.
and he died.
And he died, and the going gossip was he died from an unknown virus. So it could have been anything. Could have been anything. Probably it could have been a snake bite, but people didn't know. But all of a sudden, he's not there anymore. And I can remember going to his funeral in the bush, which was very unusual to see a funeral in the bush. And I can remember it was a fairly far away, fairly big distance, going across a river and if you went across a river, you didn't take a boat from one shore to the other. It was a ferry on a rope. So they would rope you
Oh, I
across
see, yeah.
to one side, and I can remember doing that and probably getting on a lorry on the other side, but I don't even know if that was available over there. Anyway, going to this funeral for this man. And we stayed up all night long, and they sang funeral songs, and people were mourning, obviously, his family and people who had known him. And we drank palm wine, we ate, and it went on all night.
All
I'm
night.
talking like until 6 a.m. And I can remember that vividly.
And it started like at 7 or 8 in the evening.
Yeah, I have
Went
no
until
idea.
So almost 12 hours.
Right. It was
Wow.
very intense, very intense.
Is that typical for a funeral?
I would imagine it was the only one I was invited to or went to, so I'm imagining that was fairly typical. Also, there were two when Sierra Leonean children come of age, they go through the Bundu or the Poro Society. The Bundu is for women and the Poro Society is for men. And that's when they get, the men, not the women necessarily, but they get scars on their face and they're put out in the bush and they have to prove their manhood. and there's a hole, and it's very private. You never find out what's going on in this. And the Bundu Society was for the women who were 13, coming of age, and
Is that marrying age in Sierra Leone?
no,
13?
not necessarily. It was just coming of age. So I'm not sure what the youngest girls would have been to get married. It just never came up. I never investigated it.
So you didn't go to any weddings?
No, no. But there was another thing where there would be men, not women, come through the village. And they would have a mask on and raffia. So this was from the Ivory Coast. I went to the Ivory Coast at Christmas one year. But they would have a mask on with raffia. And
they would wear that?
They would have a mask on so you could not see their face. And again, it was a cultural thing where if they came in dancing, they were called, I can't remember the name of them. It was a sense of magic, and I'm not sure why they would come in to the villages, but if they did, you were not allowed to look at them. So
Wow.
They would say the man was coming dressed like that, and he would dance and so forth. And I still don't know what the purpose was, whether it was, to make a point, for the villages that he was in power, that they should do what he was saying they should do. So I don't know. I'd have to research that more.
And then the women belonged to a separate society.
Yes,
And
but
they didn't have to prove their manhood, but
No.
what did they?
I don't know. It was very private. It was very private.
Well, you're a woman.
You knew not to ask. You knew not to ask that this was, and this, they told us all this when we were training. Now you're going to come across these things, but it's best not to investigate, not to be intrusive into what their culture is in the private. And that was very private.
Being intrusive is one thing, but being curious about the people that you're living with is another.
Right. But like I said, it was a very private women's initiation. And I mean, you've heard of, I don't know this happened, but they could physically take a part of a woman's body. And I don't know if you know that, but that may be
Who could?
in the Bundu Society.
Oh.
They might take the woman out, and there's a part of their body that, and it's, I don't want to get into it, but it's something that they would do to young girls, and literally some of the girls bled to death. The older women, this is what's been, I had it done to me, you're going to have it done to you, and this was passed down.
Yeah.
And it was basically, I think, a paternal thing that men did not want the women to have, to enjoy sex. I'll be honest. So this was taken away, and
Yikes.
it's, yeah, and it's still, I think it's still happening.
Even now? Huh. Are you in contact with anybody there?
Unfortunately not.
How long did you maintain a contact with people that you knew there after you left?
Well, as I said, we had a reunion, so we're talking.
Yeah, but that's Peace Corps reunion.
Okay.
I'm talking
The people that I left, I kept in contact with my roommate, Canadian roommate, but there was a sense of, what address do you use?
Yeah.
What phone number do you
Yeah.
use? There was neither.
Right.
So to keep in contact with people would have been very, very difficult. So you kind of left that life and you moved on. You came back and you moved on with your life.
Let me just tell you what I did back in, I can't remember the year now, 2009 maybe or 10. somebody was telling me about Facebook, and I thought, oh no, I don't care anything about Facebook. That's just a lot of gossip. And they said, well, but weren't you in Peace Corps? And I said, yes. And they said, they have Facebook in those countries. Did you know that?
No.
No, I didn't
Oh,
know
you
that.
didn't know either.
So, you think if I joined Facebook, that I might be able to
Contact them.
contact them? And they said, give it a try. So that was in Ada, where I was at a meeting, and then I drove back to my home in Oklahoma City. And the first thing I did when I got there was get on my laptop and look it up. And there was a Facebook group in my town that I was in. So I got on there and I asked to join. Bingo.
Right. Well, on Facebook, there's Peace Corps Sierra Leone. There's Peace Corps RSV, Returned Peace Corps Volunteers organizations.
Right.
In fact, recently, with the things that are going on with Doge, there's alerts that come through. The Doge people have just gone to Peace Corps headquarters.
Yes, right.
And people's, they're up in arms because of what's going on, because it's soft diplomacy. It's always been, you talk to somebody, I'll meet an African and I have an African radar, which means that they start speaking, maybe the British accent comes through and I'll say, where are you from? I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Ghana. And so you start talking to them and you say, I was Peace Corps in the late 60s before you were even born. Normally they're younger.
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, they knew of Peace Corps volunteers that had come to their country. So it was, like I said, soft diplomacy and we did not go in I did not go in where we were superior. In fact, it was the opposite.
Sure.
That when I came back, it was what they taught me rather than what I taught them. And I think that's across the line, across the Peace Corps experience.
Oh, I think so too.
That you came back and, culturally we were more advanced, but in many ways, but at the same time, there was so much that they taught us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on some of those as you think about them over the years, about the many benefits that you derived from being in Sierra Leone?
Right. Well, we talked about cultural, what was the word we used when you first came in? Cultural, It was a word. Anyway, when you go into country, of course, everything. No, when you come back and you go into a grocery store.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, there's a
there's
word
a term.
for it. Yeah, right.
Anyway, going in, everything is foreign to you. I mean, everything, pretty much. Travel, food. So you're soaking in all of this. And when you come home, culture shock. When you come home, it's the same in a way that you have this sense of people don't realize what and I don't like the third world country idea because that's elitist,
right.
I think.
It is.
But at the same time, you go in to the country not feeling that you're superior. That's how we went in. There was no sense of, I've got something to teach you and you don't know about it. That was not what we went in.
No.
We went in because we were young idealists. And when I went back to the reunion 7 years ago to the people who were in the Eastern Province with me, I had the same sense of talking to them, that they learned more from their experience and it changed their worldview forever.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely,
yeah.
It has. Huh. I think that's great that you all get back together like that. Do you have another one planned?
No, but the cohesiveness of having been young, having been idealistic, having been new graduates, all of that. There's one of our Peace Corps friends that is not well in St. Louis. And we have literally grouped around him
Oh, that's
and
nice.
contacted him, sent him cards, talked to his cousin to see how he's doing. So that sense of, I've known him for 50 years, and that's important
It sure
to
is.
keep that relationship going. So
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't guess you figure you'll ever go back.
I have friends who have gone back,
Uh-huh.
and unfortunately, in Liberia in 1991, there was a man named Charles Taylor who has been in The Hague that he was convicted of war crimes,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the Liberian Civil War, it fed over into the Sierra Leonean Civil War, and which set this country back. It was awful. Almost like in Rwanda. I mean, people would go
Oh,
through
wow,
and
that's
kill,
really awful.
yes,
Yeah.
kill villages. And there is a man that wrote a book, basically Soldier Child, that he was conscripted into an arm. It wasn't. I'm not sure if it was army or not, but he was conscripted into fighting. And he had to come out psychologically because he had killed people. And so there was a long story short, there was a storyteller in Tulsa that I met, and I realized somehow she was talking about this Ishmael who had written this book, and I got the book and read it, and it was devastating. So people who are Peace Corps that have gone back to the country out of curiosity have found out, even if you go online now and pull up Peace Corps visiting, they have YouTube driving through Freetown, for example. In 50 years, because of the Civil War setting them back, you look and say, my gosh, that looks like it when I was there. I mean, there's nothing...
No growth.
There's not much growth, and that's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. Anyway, you don't do that. You don't get on
I
Facebook.
haven't gone. No, I have not gone on Facebook, and I have not gone back. But I have friends who have. And like I said, the capital of Sierra Leone is called Freetown. The reason the people primarily were picked from the western part of Africa was they were rice growers. So when they were brought in as slaves in the outer islands, South Carolina, Georgia, they were experts in growing rice. And so people don't realize that they came over with a knowledge that maybe the Americans did not have at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were given freedom, they went back to Sierra Leone, and it was called Freetown because of that. They were being freed.
Okay. It seems like... I lost my train of thought. Are there some stories that you have been thinking about telling me, and I haven't given you the opportunity?
Right. Being a teacher, you tell stories to children all the time. And I can remember vividly being invited one night to a man who was Mende. So I did not know he was fluent in Mende.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids were all, it was kind of, at nighttime they had a fire going and everybody was surrounding this one man. And he was telling, because there was no writing involved, because they were not, the Mende was, at that point in time, I'm sure it wasn't like Sequoia who had made Mende into, written language.
Yeah.
So it was passing down stories from history that they were, and the kids were absolutely, you'd hear them laughing and you go, I wish I could understand what he was saying. But it was a sense of that oral history that was being told to the children. And it was just fascinating to me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that was another snake story was I was in the kitchen and all of a sudden I was cooking. And I think I thought I was cooking in the kitchen. And all of a sudden a black mamba, which is very poisonous. They're green and black mambas, came slithering. There was a gap in the back door, and he came in through there, and he's kind of undulating against the wall.
Ooh,
And my
wow.
first inclination, I got up on a chair because you don't want to mess with them. And I started yelling for my roommate, and I don't think she was there, but the vibration of me yelling, he took off. Another thing that's there is army ants. So one time,
Big ones.
not necessarily.
Oh.
The term army ants go because they literally, the front door was here, the back door was there, and one time we saw these ants coming through, and you don't want to step on them because they're going to swarm.
Mm-hmm.
You just let them go through. So I don't know, it took a couple of days for them to go through the house. I don't know what they found to eat because we didn't have crumbs on the floor, but they went through. And the army ants, literally, they look like they're soldiers. And there's a group on the outside that kind of keeps them contained, and you can see them, So that was interesting that I'd never heard about before. But like I said, we were told these things. I can remember during training sitting under a tree, and all of a sudden, what's biting me? And there were ants that were on the tree. Mm-hmm. Then another time I was walking through the bush, which is what's the forest, and I came upon a tree, and I thought, I was 21, I'll just grab that limb and swing on it. Mm-hmm. Just out of the blue. It was low enough, I'll swing on it.
Sure.
Sounds good. So I got off the tree, and pretty soon my hands looked like balloons. Because the tree had some sort of,
Something.
Yeah. Poison in it. And I can remember that reaction in my hands. Thankfully, it did not go down or, affect my breathing, nothing.
Wow.
It was just very swollen hands, which probably went away in 24 hours. But I thought I learned a lesson. You just don't know these things. That was something they would never have told you. Well, don't swing on a tree. You just found it through experience.
Uh-huh. You probably had a lot of experiences like that, where you didn't know, you did something, and it blew up in front of you in some way.
Right. I would go through, like I said, there was a Peace Corps volunteer who had been there a year, and he was teaching art in the college, and he lived quarter of a mile away, not even that. And if I'd go over to visit him, because you get lonely, you have a book, a box of books. I don't know if they provided books that were of interest, because there were many hours the electricity went off. They did have a generator because it was a college. You had students who had to study, so they had generators. They had kerosene lamps. They had kerosene refrigerator, which I was in a spoiled situation as far as I was concerned. And so I would walk over, because you do get lonely and you want, to speak English as Americans spoke. So I'd go over, but I knew that there were snakes in the field where I was walking. So literally I would clap my way across. I never, thankfully, came across any. But I did go to a village one time to visit other friends that I had to take a lorry to, and I was going there to spend the weekend. And I got out of the lorry, and I did have about a mile to walk, and there was a snake, probably a 10-foot snake across the path. I waited for him to go across. I had no idea what kind he was.
I get the impression that there was more danger to you from snakes than there was soldiers in the Civil War.
Well, the Civil War, you never had a sense of there being a civil war. There would be soldiers at stop points that you would give money to, and they would let you go on. But you would never get the sense of, sometimes you would hear shooting.
Yeah.
But there was no sense of it coming close, that danger being close. There was no sense of them coming into the village and taking over. It was very on the outside of what we were experiencing. But we were in the eastern province where there was more going on, in the rest of the country. I have no idea.
You mean it might have been worse in the western
It could have
part of the
been,
country?
yeah.
More dangerous.
And like I said, it was all over the voting. It was all over who was going to have the power in the government.
Did anybody ask you your opinion on that?
No, no. There was
Okay.
no political talk, really. And that far away from the capital, people were living their lives very simply. I mean, it was not something...
And were they basically happy?
Yes, to this day, I just remember. They're, number one, physically, the Sierra Leone people are just very attractive. They're very pretty and handsome. And the friendliness, I never felt that somebody was taking, oh, that's a white woman, you know, or she's different. I never got that sense.
No,
I was
that's great.
being enveloped in friendship.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And you felt that way for 2 years?
Yes, yeah, I really did.
Oh, that is...
I never, even with the Muslim, and like I said, the Muslim men you would see, not in the village, you'd see Kenema, which was the capital of the Eastern Province. If you went there, you would see people garbed in Muslim clothing. But there was no religious tension at all. They were Muslim, and that was fine. And the Presbyterian Church ran the college, so there was a sense of, but I never remember going to any services, or there could have been services that the Africans were involved in. I don't know. I never got involved in that.
Did you go to any kind of church
No.
when you were there?
No.
They didn't ask you to
No.
attend?
No.
Okay.
And like I said, it was the religion that most of the people had was based on nature. So it was very, I think that's another problem I have, to kind of like the Native Americans in the United States, to force people to believe what the people are bringing in as missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that reason, they're happy with their religion. You know, it's, to us, it's so foreign because they think of a tree or something, you know, to have power. Like I said, we would hear about stories that they would, they had we called it witchcraft in a way, and there would be somebody who would go to. There was a woman who was bitten by a snake in a rice field.
Yeah.
She didn't trust a white hospital. Even Sabuema was a town that had a hospital. She would have probably died because her blood pressure would have gone so high of nerves. But she went to the witch doctor because he would put a salve or what, a poultice on to draw the poison out. And she was much happier because she trusted that, that person, as opposed to somebody who, you know, would put her in an antiseptic hospital. It just wasn't done.
Sure. I understand that.
Yeah.
I interviewed a lot of Chickasaw women in particular who would not go to hospitals when they were ill. They went to their own
The
doctors.
shaman.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were quite happy with it, and gave me all kinds of examples of how somebody in a grievous state got well.
Right, right. Well, there's also, I think, medicines that they can find in nature that, you know, heal people that we have no idea about.
Right. And they don't want you to know about it either, the ones that I know. If they go out in nature and get the products,
The roots, or
Yes.
whatever, leaves, whatever.
but they're not going to share details with you about that.
It never came up. It never came up where I'd be in that situation.
But you said you never got sick for 2 years. You're extremely lucky.
I had stomach palava, like I said, runny tummy, I think, runny belly, I think they called it. But other than that, and I think everybody did, because the water you
Sure.
would go into is, I mean, literally, I tell my son this, first of all. I was at a dinner last night, and I said, and I took too much. And I said, I'm taking the plate home. Just give me a Ziploc bag. And oh no, we'll just throw it. No, I'm taking it home. nothing. That's another thing, culture shock, that people are just so take advantage of things that we have, and I don't. So something, to me, saving something and eating it later is just something that I do because I understand that I'm blessed.
Can you remember what it was like when you first got back to the States for you?
Well, they told us we would expect culture shock, that when you're living in a situation where people don't have much, and then you come back to a civilization where people have too much, in my estimation, it's very disconcerting to this day. And we're talking 50 years after this experience. Yeah. I still see people very blasé going through a grocery store, and I'm thinking, you have no idea. And I just want to almost shake them. I don't, but I almost want to shake them. But they have no sense of what we've got, that you can just go to a store and get a box of strawberries. I mean, it's unheard of. I can remember being in the village at one point, and a boy went by on a bicycle, and he had a water buffalo head on the back of the bicycle, dripping blood. And I'm going, because they would take the brains or whatever they did I didn't follow them and find out what they did with the head. Yeah. But I'm sure there was something that they used for food. And Sierra Leone had a big beach. It was called Laughrey Beach. And you would see men going out in boats. There was a lot of fishing because I said primarily the staples were rice and dry fish. So they would get it, and the palm wine and palm oil is something that is pretty much in many, many American foods. And they would have palm oil. The fish would be cooked in palm oil, and that's very fattening. And so, but it provided protein.
Yeah. Have you been influential in persuading anyone to join Peace Corps?
Yes, when I find out people are graduating from high school or graduating from college and they really don't know where they're going to put their energy, I'll say, have you considered it? And I was at this Global Alliance dinner the other night, which is an international group who welcomes students, foreign students at the University of Tulsa and so forth. And there was a woman who grew up in Colombia, had moved to Brazil, and I looked at her and I said, well, I was in West Africa. Oh, really? And I said, yes, I lived there. And I said, I was Peace Corps. And I said, do you know Peace Corps? And she was probably late 30s, early 40s, and she had no idea what the Peace Corps was. None. Yeah. She had never come across anybody. So, but I've encouraged people. I said it will change. Number one, it changes your worldview, and that's a given. It's going to change your worldview. And there's an expression: the hardest job you'll ever love.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So we have 10 minutes.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to tell me that maybe you thought about before I got here today?
Yeah, I just wanted to, and I'm not sure if you got me showing you the instrument. You saw this one. And I traveled to Ivory Coast, which was a French-speaking country, and I had studied French in high school. But they were Peace Corps in French in Abidjan, which was the capital of the Ivory Coast. And that's another thing. If you visited and you'd say, where's the Peace Corps house, people would direct you there. And that was something that they welcomed you. Here's a bed that you can stay in. So at Christmas, I traveled to the Ivory Coast. I went back by steamship, which was, they carried lumber. It wasn't a cruise ship. So we said, we want to get back to Sierra Leone. Fine. Here's a cabin. Pay us a little money, and you'll take your back. So I got, when I was there, this was one of the things I got.
Is
And
there a story behind those?
Well, there are outside stores for people who want,
You want to know?
souvenirs.
Oh,
I don't know how many Africans buy these kind of things, but you have. I met a man who was traveling, a Westerner American who was traveling in Ivory Coast at that point, and he got very sick. He was not well at all. But so there are people who look for things like this. I have friends who were in the Peace Corps. They collected many, many artifacts like this, and they've donated it to a college. And there's a whole exhibit of their face masks that they.
Yeah.
It was something that was their hobby of doing. This was a picture. Can you get close enough? Okay, this was a common market where the women would sell food, and you would bargain.
okay.
So at one point, I think I was coming back from the Ivory Coast, and some women were there with oranges. Everything is carried on your head. In fact, the Peace Corps would put our suitcases on our head. And the Sierra Leonean women had pads, and they put it on there. And you wondered, and there was a certain walk they had which made it easier for this. It could be 50 pounds of oranges on their head. So,
Wow.
and we got off this boat in Freetown, and of course there were women selling food, and there were oranges that she was selling. And I said, Creole, I was not fluent in Creole. Creole is a patois that is you can understand because it's part English, part tribal language, and they put it together.
Yeah.
So I said, how much? And she said, an outrageous amount, thinking I didn't know what I was talking about. I said, no way. And she knew that I had lived in country because she could have hooked somebody coming off that didn't know anything about how much everything cost.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
And there was, I was The Adventures of Nancy the Bush Girl. And this is a book that I wrote, and it was all about Peace Corps training.
When did you write it?
This was me, my graduate school picture from college. And I just, the Bush Girl started out as an average American college girl in 1968. But then it all happened. She wrote a 1,000,000-page application to the Peace Corps.
A million.
Here is Nancy as the clean-cut college girl. Then to the surprise, she got a letter, and I told you the story about my dad. So then we went to medical staging in Philadelphia, and literally we were the first Peace Corps group to train in country. We had friends that we found out earlier had been to Puerto Rico or similar places that would be the climate would be similar, so that's when they trained, but it was not in country. So that was something that was told to us that was very special, because when we got off, we were dealing with native people from the moment we got off that plane.
I would like to take some credit for that and my group.
Good.
Because our group trained for 10 weeks on the big island of Hawaii. And to me, it was paradise. I'd never believed for a second that I would ever be in Hawaii. And there I was for 10 weeks with all these people from other colleges. And just absolutely enjoyed the whole time. One of the greatest times of my life. And then when we got to Manila, it was
totally different.
You talk about culture shock.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we said, as a group, when we were still in country before we were dispersed to our assignments, don't do this again.
So that was 67?
67.
So we were the next year, and they took you at your word.
Maybe they did.
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah.
I hope they did.
Well, like I said, I wanted to write I'm not sure if I sent this interestingly enough. When I went to Sierra Leone, I took a roll, what is it, those old machines. What's my Alexa? Can you turn that off a minute?
Sure.
Okay. I had a reel-to-reel where I would speak into the microphone and tell my parents the experiences, and then I would send aerograms, which was the blue.
Yep.
And I've gone through those. I don't know if I have one. Anyway, the aerogram was. I sent them all the time, and I read them about a year ago. It was so interesting as a 21-year-old writing to her parents about this experience. So I would ask them to send batteries, which is the machine was run on. And oftentimes, I don't know if you call it corruption, but the batteries would come into the post office in Freetown, never make it to me.
Right.
So it was really iffy if I would get the batteries. But I did make the tapes. And because I don't know, I think I sent these home. I made these books for them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called This is Africa, and there's a map with the country. And the pictures, and I'm not sure, I had a friend who was a photographer. I think that's where I got the pictures. But I took poems and matched them to the pictures.
Oh, you wrote the poems?
No, this was a poem from Gambia. So I probably had a book in the book locker that I found poetry, and I matched the pictures.
Oh, that's neat.
This is a very old lady, and but it's here's Nigeria poem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a woman who is with her child. This is a woman who is with her child.
Oh, that's a good one.
Here's something that reminds me. This metal bowl was put over a fire to make rice, but oftentimes you would go into a village and there would be two women winnowing, I guess it's winnowing rice, and they had a big pole, and you hear thump, 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 and they'd take turns thumping this probably 5 or 6 foot, very big log into I'm not sure if they had that in the Philippines, no. So that was how they got the rice separated from the chaff, I think. I don't know technically what that is. And so here's I talked about carrying things on your head, and that was a given. I mean, you would never see somebody carrying something in their hand. I mean, that's a overstatement, but that's how they did it. Because they would have to walk long distances if they harvested. I had a banana tree in my backyard, but if they harvested something that they were going to take to market to sell, they had to do it the most efficient way, and that was on their head. The children who came to my school, nobody had shoes. They were all barefoot. They had blue uniforms. Excuse me, and I think it was very, very marginal what they had to pay for their school fees. It could have been 2 leones for a semester. I can't remember exactly, but it was very marginal. And for these people to come up with that amount of money was very difficult, which is why we hired, when you say you hired houseboys, oh my gosh. But they needed the money to go to school.
That's right.
So they would help us, and they would make, they'd prepare dinner. They were very, they're boys, but they had been trained to do the things that, the house chores. And so that was nice for us because we were working, teaching, so for us to do that on top of that would have been a little bit more difficult. But
Have you ever thought about what your life might have been like had you not joined the Peace Corps?
Yes. I use the word worldview because unless you've been there, and lived it, you can talk a blue streak about like I have today.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you have that gut feeling of having been there and experienced it and having these memories that show you that there's another world out there that we don't know about as Americans, and that to me, every 21-year-old or college graduate almost needs to do that to make them understand the world.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
it.
That's a good
Good
place.
ending.